Signed and sealed, the Napthine government enters a contract to build the east-west toll road. A Sydney man murdered in Afghanistan. Authorities say he was singled out because he was Australian. Hong Kong comes to a standstill as tens of thousands make a stand for democracy. And dozens feared dead in Japan as hikers failed to outrun an erupting volcano. Good evening, Ian Henderson with ABC News. The Napthine government today signed the contracts for the first stage of the East-West Link tollway. The Premier says the project will now proceed quickly, but much of the deal remains sketchy. The contracts with a consortium headed by Lendlease were finalised soon after the High Court today rejected a bid to delay the signing until mid-October. We're joined now by our state politics reporter, Francis Bell. Francis, what do we know about what's in those contracts?
Well, very little, Ian. The government was giving very little away after it signed the contracts late this afternoon. We do know that Lendlease, the head of that winning consortium, East West Connects, made a statement to the Australian Stock Exchange this afternoon saying it had signed a $5.3 billion contract with the government to build the first stage of the East-West Link. But very little other crucial information has been forthcoming so far. They include the final business case justifying the project, how much Victorian taxpayers will contribute to this project over the 25-year life of the contract, and also how much Victorian taxpayers would have to pay in compensation if Labor was to win the election and rip up the contracts. Now, we were told by both the Transport Minister Terry Moulder and the Premier Denis Napthine this afternoon that more information will be released tomorrow. That includes the final design and route of the first stage of the project. This is what they had to say this afternoon.
Tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow morning?
Yes. We'll do an official presentation in the morning of the following route. And I think it's important to understand with the documents that have been signed today, there's certain commercial information that will be redacted. That work will be undertaken by Linking Melbourne Authority. And my understanding is would possibly go up on the website in 2 to 3 weeks.
Lift the contract?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Francis, to what extent will today's signings tie Labor's hands? Does it still have room to move?
Well, Ian, Labor is maintaining that it will not build this road if it wins the election, and it's accusing the government of arrogance and desperation for signing these contracts just 2 months out from that November state poll. The government, on the other hand, is saying that it is simply sticking to the timeline that it set 18 months ago when it committed to building the first stage of the East-West Link, and it will be painting Labor and Daniel Andrews as risky and reckless for the position it's taking on not honouring these contracts if it wins. So both sides taking a very different approach to this project in the lead up to the election.
And what about the courts, Francis? Will they still have a say about the ultimate fate of East-West Link?
Well, not before the election, Ian. We still have the case brought by the Yarra and Moreland councils, which argues that the government breached its own planning regulations in approving this project, and that is the case that Labor is relying on to argue that these contracts are not valid. But that case will not be heard until well after the election in December. Now, also today, both the High Court and the Court of Appeal threw out an application for an injunction brought by Brunswick resident Tony Murphy, which sought to delay the signing of these contracts. So that application was thrown out, which allowed the government to sign these contracts late this afternoon. Now, our reporter Ashlyn McGee has more on that story.
It was an 11th hour bid to delay the signing. The request for an urgent injunction was argued fiercely in the High Court until mid-afternoon.
Napthine seems to be determined to deny the public a fair hearing on this and to let people decide at the election.
His barrister Ron Merkel QC told the court the government's economic modelling for East-West Link is deceptive and misleading, and that it's committing Victoria to hundreds of millions of dollars of losses. He said the government's own economic modelling standards show the project will return just 80 cents for every dollar invested. But the Victorian Solicitor General Stephen McLeish SC maintained it will generate $1.40 per dollar spent. And he repeated claims the delay could lead to a $145 million cost blowout. Lawyers for East-West Connect, the consortium chosen to build the project, told the court they'd lose $435,000 for each week of delay. In the end, those projected losses swung the case. Justice Susan Crennan dismissed the application to delay the signing of the contracts, saying the cost to the government and East-West Connect outweighed Anthony Murphy's arguments.
Obviously it's disappointing. We were denied an injunction today in the High Court.
But he still has other options. Earlier today, the Court of Appeal granted him a retrial in his bid to access the government's business case for the project.
We still think we're going to win the overall campaign. The contracts can be overturned.
But that's a matter for the court to decide. Ashlyn McGee, ABC News, Melbourne.
The Premier has rushed through the signing of contracts for the $8 billion East-West link after a day of drama that saw the High Court throw out a legal challenge to the project. The move means work could begin in days and exposes Victorian taxpayers to massive penalties if Labor wins the election and stops its construction. State political reporter Brendan Donoghue joins us now. And Brendan, the government's wasted no time.
Well, Peter, there was a mad rush to sign the contracts this afternoon, and in that the Labor Party says that public accountability was knocked over. Now, the government had a loss in the Supreme Court, a win in the High Court, and Dennis Napthine then signed the documents about 60 minutes ago. But the public is being kept in the dark about exactly how much we'll pay for the tunnel over the next 25 years. Signed and sealed just an hour ago, the government rushed to commit taxpayers to the $8 billion stage one of the East-West Tunnel.
This is a great day for Melbourne and Victoria. This is a game-changing day for Melbourne and Victoria.
But after a day of rollercoaster legal drama, the project still remains under a cloud. Brunswick activist Tony Murphy appealed and won a retrial of a Supreme Court challenge to the toll road.
It goes to the heart of the misleading and deceptive conduct the government is engaged in from the very beginning.
Just a few hours later, the state government had a win when Mr Murphy lost a High Court application for an injunction against the government signing contracts, and the government rushed to put ink to paper.
This project is really important for Melbourne and Victoria. It's about decongesting Melbourne, improving transport productivity and efficiency, and creating many, many thousands of jobs.
We're going to fight on, and we still think we're going to win the overall campaign.
Dennis Napthine is desperate to sign any sham contract before the election because he doesn't want to take it to the people and let Victorians decide.
The Napthine government has gambled on the massive toll road as the centrepiece of its re-election bid.
The government sees no reason why we shouldn't get on with this project delivering these benefits for Victorians.
The Labor Party is opposed to the tunnel, saying the money is better spent fixing public transport and removing congestion at rail level crossings.
And Brendan, what sort of bill could Victorian taxpayers now face if Labor moves to scrap the project?
Well, for a start, Peter, Victoria would lose the $3 billion the federal government has put on the table for the project. Then there's a question of the compensation clause in the contract. That would go towards the consortium if Labor scraps the contract. That's reported to be worth about $500 million. But once again, the Premier won't comment on the compensation clause. He says the public will have to wait a number of days until we get the full details. Peter?
Good evening. After months of violent protests and protracted legal action, the Napthine government late today signed contracts to build the controversial East-West Link road project. It came after a day of high drama in the courts, with a lone Brunswick resident trying to stop the Premier putting pen to paper ahead of November's state election. Karen Huff reports.
The government wasted no time. Little over an hour after the High Court ruled against an injunction, pens were poised. The East-West Link is the cornerstone of the government's transport plan and has been threatened by a single protesting litigant, so this was cause for celebration.
This is a fantastic day for Melbourne and Victoria when this government has been pleased to announce that we've signed the contract for stage one of the East-West Link project.
Anthony Murphy says he acts on behalf of the public of Victoria and has court-hopped to stop the project. This afternoon in the High Court, Mr Murphy, with some legal might, fought for an injunction to prevent the contracts being signed, pending a retrial of his consumer-based case, but he lost.
See, it's disappointing. We were denied an injunction today in the High Court, but we've still got the special leave to appeal in the High Court on the 17th of October. So all in all, it's been a good day, and we're fighting on.
The judge had to weigh up the balance of convenience. In other words, who would be most put out by the injunction. East West Connect claimed it would lose $435,000 a week, and other confidential affidavits about loss and damage were filed with the court, tipping the decision in favour of the respondents.
Well, our legal advice is clear. Any sham contract that Dennis Napthine signs before the election is not worth the paper it's written on.
But it's not over. Earlier today, the Court of Appeal declared the dismissal of Mr Murphy's first trial invalid because procedure wasn't followed and the business plan was not disclosed. So the retrial, fought on the grounds that consumers have been duped about the cost-benefit, could still disrupt the project.
This is a game-changing day for Melbourne and Victoria. This is a day we take a significant step towards decongesting Melbourne.
Karen Huff, 9 News.
Good evening. The state government has smashed through a legal roadblock on its $8 billion East-West link. In breaking news, the first contracts for the controversial project are being signed as we go to air tonight. We'll have more as this story unfolds. It was a rollercoaster afternoon in court. Emma O'Sullivan has the day's developments.
The man leading the legal charge against the $8 billion project arrived at court on his bicycle, then suited up for battle. Tony Murphy claimed to be acting on behalf of all Victorians. But this afternoon he lost the High Court bid to stop the government from signing contracts.
Napthine seems to be determined to deny the public a fair hearing on this.
Lawyers for the government and East West Connect revealed how anxious they were to seal the deal. The court was told if contracts weren't signed by October 1st, the consortium would lose about $435,000 a week. That was backed by the Premier.
And we're ready to sign a contract at the earliest available opportunity.
Any sham contract signed before the election is not worth the paper it's written on.
Earlier, Tony Murphy did have a win in the Court of Appeal. He won a retrial on the question of whether the Napthine government has misled Victorians about the project's economic benefits.
It goes to the heart of the misleading and deceptive conduct this government is engaged in from the very beginning.
Lawyers told the High Court the government's own modelling reveals the project would lose 20 cents for every dollar invested. The government maintains the project will deliver a benefit of $1.476 billion over its economic life. Emma O'Sullivan, 10 Eyewitness News.
Let's go now to David Woywood. David, this is a green light for Victoria's biggest infrastructure project.
Well, that's right, Stephen. Not 10 minutes ago, the Premier put pen to paper and signed Victoria up to building the $6 to $8 billion East-West Link project. Of course, it's been a long time coming, and Premier Dennis Napthine has staked his leadership on this project. There is no doubt about that. And after this community challenge was struck out of the High Court today, a challenge brought about by Brunswick resident Anthony Murphy, well, the Premier wasted no time in inking those contracts. It is a project that has been shrouded in secrecy. Of course, the business case is still under lock and key, but the government has said that now that those contracts have been signed, details will slowly be released. It's been a bumpy road. It's had community opposition, and the Labor Party, of course, has had a bet each way. It is now saying that it will be supporting another community legal challenge set down for December. So not over yet, but certainly a big hurdle out of the way for Premier Dennis Napthine. Stephen.
David Woywood reporting in the city.